Hello everyone, and welcome to the 102 Hours YouTube channel. Tonight we venture into shadows above a noisy dining room, where the faint echo of clinking chopsticks is swallowed by a silent horror. You trudge past neon lanterns glowing amber, imagining warm dumplings in steam clouds, then you probably won't survive this. Somewhere above, a 5-year-old lies hidden in the ceiling of a Chinese restaurant run by their own parents. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below with your location and local time so we can see who's joining us from afar. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch beneath the restaurant's parasol of bamboo beams, inhaling the mingled scents of sizzling soy and warm oil. Beneath your fingers, the plaster tile trembles faintly, as if alive. The lead investigator tugs at a corner with gloved fingertips, revealing dark splinters and a patch of grainy dust. As the panel creaks open, a hush falls over the room like an old case file closing. Suddenly, the ceiling cavity yields a small shape. The child's form, curled and still, seems suspended in midair, as if dreaming of chasing fireflies under the moonlight. Your heart thuds against the back of your throat, picturing the ordinary scene moments before, laughter over chopstick challenges, the chef's rhythm of knives chopping vegetables in time with clattering plates. In modern crime lore, investigators often use K-9 units to sniff out missing persons, but here the secret was trapped overhead. Historians still argue whether attic hideouts in early 20th century arson cases inspired later concealment tactics, yet this case takes that uneasy legacy in a brand new direction. A forensic technician slides a gloved hand into the cavity, coaxing loose dust into evidence trays. You notice a single red rubber ball, odd, puckering against the plaster. Local children loved bouncing that very toy in the alley, chasing its ricochet across faded brick. A quirky rumor even circulated online that the child had a habit of hiding up top during hide-and-seek and once cried out for a bedtime lullaby just beneath this exact spot. The scene reminds you of Mary Rogers in the 1841 Manhattan Mystery, whose body was found in a pantry, launching modern detective units. That was decades before the NYPD formed its first official homicide division in 1857, setting standards we still follow today. In that Victorian mystery, investigators documented dust on door thresholds to reconstruct the timeline, a technique still echoed here as technicians photograph each speck and smudge. In the hush, you sense the gravity of peeling back more than wood panels. Above the fluorescent glow, the child's small shoes dangle just out of reach, the laces knotted in a spectator's futile dance. An echo of W. Ashby's landmark forensic treatise from 1933 lies in the margins of every grain of plaster, how pressure points reveal human interaction. Yet debate simmers in criminology circles. Historians still argue whether Ashby's methods overstate the value of microscopic debris in solving violent deaths. Your breath slows as the evidence board grows, fingerprints on the chenille fabric nearby, a scrap of embroidered sleeve, and a faint smudge of soot from unseen ductwork. A beam of LED light illuminates a delicate scrape on the ceiling joist, suggesting a child's fingernail caught on coarse wood. That tiny mark becomes a testament to desperate struggle, played out in the narrow space above ramen grinders and rice steamers. You lean forward, noting a peculiar fragrance lingering, a hint of jasmine tea leaves, spilled hours earlier, infusing the attic space. Investigators found tea dribbles on the southeast panel, a fringe tidbit whispered that the child spilled the tea during a secret midnight feast of fortune cookies and dreams. As you visualize each forensic shader mapping the cavity's contours, you're reminded of the 1935 Lindbergh baby case, where cloth fibers guided detectives across state lines. The child's linen shirt here carried faint fibers from upholstery below, connecting ceiling above to dining chairs where unwitting patrons sat. Such cross-referencing echoes methods that defined the FBI's early microscopic analysis unit in 1932. In that silent moment, the hum of the extractor fan overhead becomes a lullaby turned chilling lull. You remember the metallic scent, the stale air pockets, and the way the plaster grated like broken promises. Each sound and smell stitches itself into your mind, as if the ceiling itself is telling a story, one that begins with innocent play and ends in unbearable silence. You rise and step back, the panel lowered but the questions floating overhead. How long had the child been unseen? What hesitation held the parents from checking the loft? The room feels smaller now, burdened by all the unsaid. Although forensic textbooks chronicle such discoveries, this tragedy defies easy explanation, leaving a hush that lingers in every echo of broken tiles. You step past the red lanterns into the restaurant's steady heartbeat, where every clang of wok and murmur of conversation fits like a note in a well-rehearsed symphony. You hover by the polished mahogany counter, feeling the soft glow of paper lanterns warm on your skin. The maitre d' greets a late couple with a practiced bow, lips curved in just the right measure of warmth. In the open kitchen beyond, a line cook spins noodles with balletic precision, steam curling in languid spirals. You watch the rhythm, customers settle into red vinyl booths, menus rustling like soft pages in a clandestine novel. The scent of five spice melds with fried garlic, weaving through the air with hypnotic repetition. You notice the server's quick smile as she balances saucers heaped with dim sum, though her eyes flicker toward the ceiling vents as if searching for something unseen. In the corner, the cashier taps merrily at the register, humming a tune that barely masks her exhaustion. There's a tension beneath the flow, like a string pulled taut behind every genial gesture. Historians still argue whether the rigid rituals of Victorian-era dining etiquette influenced early 20th century speakeasy service styles, but here you sense the lineage of polished hospitality concealing silent unease. A flicker of neon from the street lamp dances across lacquered tables, revealing tiny cracks in the wood grain where countless elbows have rested. You run your finger along one groove, imagining diners past, silent businessmen in bowler hats, families trading gossip over steaming bowls of congee. In 1888, Alphonse Bertillon introduced standardized mugshots to French police, forever changing criminal identification. Similarly, this restaurant's routine masks grainy clues that lurk just out of sight. Muddy footprints sometimes appear on the white floor tiles by dawn, though no one admits to tracking through at closing time, an odd whisper that flutters among the night crew. You slide into a booth, watching a server pour tea with cautious care, porcelain clinking against itself in a soft rhythm that tucks you into focus. Each pour pauses the world for a heartbeat, steam rising, petals drifting in the deep amber brew. A diner next to you requests extra chili oil, the server's wrist arching in a fluid curve before she disappears into the back. You inhale the warm spice, tasting the faint vinegary tang that lingers on the tongue. In that moment, you feel the restaurant breathe around you, its pulse measured, familiar. Behind the kitchen curtain, the line cooks exchange clipped words in Cantonese. You can't catch the meaning, but you sense urgency flicker in their glances. A massive cleaver thuds against the chopping block, echoing like a gavel in a hushed courtroom. Forensic historians note that the Cleveland torso murders in the 1930s utilized toolmark analysis on bones. Here, every chop and slice leaves its own mark on the evening's narrative. Yet debate simmers. Historians still argue whether toolmark analysis truly pinpoints individual instruments or simply narrows broad categories. A fringe rumor floats online that a dishwasher once heard a child's giggle echoing from the vents at 2 a.m., long after the staff thought they'd locked up. You hear that rattling in the dryer, an off-key chime that shouldn't belong. Nobody says I heard that out loud, too afraid of what acknowledgement might summon. You glance at the ceiling tiles, tracing their grid as if mapping a secret blueprint. Every square panel feels like it could conceal a hidden chamber, a truth too unsettling to confront. In the dining room's glow, the waitstaff move in near silence, their steps muffled by carpet runners and faded linoleum. You notice how the busboys carry used dishes with military-like discipline, stacking bowls to avoid a single scrape. That precision mirrors the 19th century Pinkerton agents, renowned for their strict protocols, another mainstream fact in true crime lore. Yet you sense an undercurrent, a busboy's knuckles blanch white when he grips the metal tray, as though bracing himself for a weight no one acknowledges. A neon open sign flickers, its red hue pulsing in time with your slightly racing pulse. The glass front door opens and closes, each jolt sending a ripple through the reflection of the kitchen lights. Patrons sip jasmine tea and converse in hushed tones, oblivious to the small tragedy suspended above them. You can't help but wonder, how often do we overlook the quiet corners of our lives, focused solely on the spectacle of the main stage? In 1920s Chicago, gangland shootings unfolded in theaters and diners alike, while onlookers applauded vaudeville acts just doors away, proof that normalcy can coexist with horror. You watch the hostess straighten her apron, her breath visible in a flicker of cold air from the air conditioner vent. She glances up ever so slightly, as if the ceiling might respond. A quirky detail, the vents carry the faint aroma of cotton candy, leftover sent from a birthday party held 3 nights ago, a fact tucked in the dashed margins of the incident report. You imagine the child, cheeks sticky with pink sugar, scampering among adults who never guessed where he'd vanish. Noise rises and falls like a tide. The chopstick challenge begins at one table, diners dare each other to pick up the slickest dumpling on silver forks. Laughter ripples, and for a moment you feel lulled by the communal thrill of a simple game. Yet the memory of the hidden child hangs behind your mind's eye, an invisible weight that presses each laugh down. In modern forensic practice, behavioral analysts sometimes study group dynamics to predict criminal behavior. Here, group laughter seems to defy logic in the face of collective denial. Historians still argue whether emotional contagion counts as evidence or mere ephemera in criminal investigations. As closing time nears, a soft bell jingles above the door, and the night crew begins the ritual of stacking chairs on tables. You linger in the half-light, noticing how the shadows crawl across walls, pooling in corners. A server runs her fingers along the ledge above the bar, where dusty sake bottles line up like silent witnesses. She hesitates before grabbing a rag, maybe she senses the presence up there, peeking through the vents. You can almost feel a pair of tiny eyes watching every move, unseen yet undeniably there. You rise to leave, footsteps echoing on the terrazzo floor. Behind you, the kitchen's last embers glow faintly, and an extractor fan hums like an old lullaby. You pause at the threshold, glancing one final time at the ceiling panels, wondering how many routines must repeat before someone dares to look up again. The restaurant seems to hold its breath, caught between each immaculate smile and the tension that knots every practiced gesture. In that hush, you realize how ordinary rituals can mask the most extraordinary tragedies, just waiting for a curious soul to disrupt their steady beat. You slip past the yellow crime tape and into a narrow hallway that runs alongside the dining room, where fluorescent bulbs hum above scuffed linoleum. The walls here feel colder, stripped of lantern glow and warm smiles. You pause at a faded family portrait, the parents standing stiffly in front of the restaurant's neon sign, their faces composed but eyes wary. You're drawn into their story, a tapestry woven from unspoken debts and whispered rumors. Their restaurant wasn't always this one. You learn that the couple once ran a modest food stall at a weekend night market, hawking scallion pancakes to throngs of college students. From that bustling stall they scraped together enough coins for a down payment on this place 2 years ago. In 1935, after the Lindbergh baby kidnapping prompted Congress to pass the Federal Kidnapping Act, known as the Lindbergh Law, parents everywhere felt a sharpened fear of child disappearance. Historians still argue whether. But for our young family, the law's shadow lurked in their dreams, fueling an undercurrent of paranoia that this kitchen could become a crime scene long before tragedy struck. You trace a ledger book left open on a metal shelf, its pages yellowed and edges tattered. Numbers jostle in tight columns, ingredient costs rising, insurance premiums climbing after a grease fire last autumn, and mysterious withdrawals labeled simply as fix-up. A quirky local whisper insists that the money went to a feng shui master hired to exorcise bad luck from the ceiling beams, and that the master warned of a trapped spirit sheltering above the kitchen. You raise an eyebrow, imagining incense smoke curling through the rafters, half smiling at how superstition can codify guilt. Nightly, you picture the parents poring over these ledgers under lamplight, the mother's slender fingers trembling as she circled past due invoices, the father's jaw clenched as he scanned bank statements on a borrowed laptop. Their desperation was palpable, rent due, supplier bills mounting, and a lone shark's name scribbled in blood-red ink on a scrap of paper. You can almost hear the distant echo of that ominous moniker each time the kitchen door swings shut. A battered file cabinet clinks open, revealing eviction notices and a rejected permit application to expand into the adjacent storefront. The owner of the building, a retired restaurateur, noted in his margin scrawl that the couple couldn't keep the lights on even after juggling 3 shifts. And yet, despite mounting pressure, they never once paused service for fear of losing customers, a gamble driven by hope as much as anxiety. You recall the Victorian-era mystery of Florence Maybrick in 1889, where a housewife's secret financial woes tangled with accusations of poisoning her husband, demonstrating how monetary strain has long seeded suspicion in high-profile crimes. You feel the weight of that precedent here, ordinary people pushed to desperate acts when ledgers bleed red. Behind the counter, you notice a small shrine adorned with paper lanterns and a single red ribbon, an offering the parents refreshed every new moon. A fringe theory among late-night internet sleuths claims the shrine was meant to placate a restless child spirit after an earlier accident involving a drop ceiling panel, but no official report mentions any such incident. Yet the parents' ritual stands, stubborn against skepticism. You step closer, inhaling the faint aroma of jasmine incense mixed with soy glaze, and sense how every decision they made was underwritten by cost-benefit calculations gone awry. The mother, once an accounting clerk, kept meticulous journals of profit margins and payroll, but her exhaustion bled through margin notes scrawled in pencil, "Can't afford daycare." The father, a former kitchen porter, confessed in hushed tones to a coworker about borrowing money at usurious rates. Those confessions were lost to the night, but fragments linger in rumor. Cookies stamped with the child's name, carefully baked and wrapped, stood on the front counter each morning as a marketing gimmick. You imagine the child proudly handing them to early customers, unaware of the desperation propelling each batch. In fringe message boards, some speculate the baked goods served as collateral against debts, an unsettling image that tugs at your sense of parental care. You pause at the quiet corner office where the couple met to discuss expansion plans, its glass door frosted to obscure prying eyes. Behind it, a tangle of delivery invoices and promotional flyers lay stacked, a testament to their relentless drive. Yet beneath that entrepreneurial spirit lurked the pressure cooker of unpaid loans and sleepless nights, proof that ambition and strain can coalesce into a combustible mix. In 1923, the Hall Mills murder case in New Jersey revealed how the financial woes of a pastor and choir director fueled scandal and suspicion, reminding us how economic hardship can warp relationships and loyalties. That case, like this one, bleeds into modern debates about motive and opportunity. Historians still argue whether the weight of money alone can tip people toward violence. You run your hand along the edge of the office desk, feeling a sticky patch of spilled tea, an echo of the jasmine aroma lingering above. The parents often said they took turns hiding in the ceiling for quiet moments away from the restaurant's chaos, a quirky justification that now rings eerily hollow. You shiver at the thought, a child's secret retreat repurposed into a tomb. As you step back into the dining area, the portrait on the wall feels less like a happy memory and more like evidence of hopeful facades. Every cheer in that image conceals the ledger's dark lines, and every neon glow masks the family's flickering resolve. You realize how often we overlook the storm brewing behind closed doors, distracted by flickering lanterns and whispered assurances. You linger a moment longer, picturing the parents hunched over financial statements at midnight, the restaurant's silent save for the ticking clock on the wall. In that hush, every tick marks another debt unaddressed, another risk unweighed. You shudder to think how the weight of those choices could press down upon innocent shoulders, tiny shoes left dangling in a world too heavy to carry alone. You slip into the rush of the dinner crowd, the restaurant humming like a well-oiled kettle. You taste the sharp tang of vinegar mingled with the nutty scent of sesame oil, and feel the low vibration of cleavers chopping in rhythm. It's 8:57 p.m., and the child sits in a booster seat by the kitchen hatch, thumb tracing the rim of a wooden bowl. You almost empathize, then, unnoticed by diners swiping through social feeds, the booster nudges free. You sense it before you see it, a soft scrape against the tile, but your focus snaps back to the clatter of a wok's flip. A waitress bearing steamed buns hustles past, her elbow grazing the booster. You catch the thud, a muted drumbeat against porcelain, but you shrug it off in the tide of orders. Meanwhile, the child darts past the stove, toes skimming cool linoleum, toward the storeroom door left ajar for restocking. You imagine their small hand on the handle, cold, smooth, turning it with childish curiosity. By 9:02 p.m., the CCTV above the register captures a flicker, a tiny silhouette crossing into its blind spot. In 1996, lawmakers launched the Amber Alert system to broadcast missing child information nationwide within hours of an abduction, revolutionary speed unmatched in earlier eras. Historians still argue whether our faith in technology blinds us to its blind spots, and here, no alert sounds, just screens ignored by the busy staff. The child, curious and bold, climbs onto a stack of rice sacks in the annex. You feel the sacks shift underfoot, each rustle lost amid chef's laughter. The grid of ceiling panels above sits loose, like a promise waiting to be broken. You shiver, recalling the warped tile from section 1, the scrape on the joist you studied by flashlight, a tiny testament to mischief or worse. At 9:15 p.m., a delivery driver arrives, boots thudding on the threshold, yet he doesn't notice the faint creak from above. Two patrons at the noodles bar laugh over spicy broth, their voices masking the child's soft footfalls. A fringe rumor on late-night forums claims local kids once played hide-and-seek up here, leaving secret initials carved into tiles. No one looked for years. You pass the staff locker room, hand grazing your tray as you wonder if you saw a sock flicker overhead. In 1874, Mary Ellen Wilson's abuse case spurred America's first child protection laws, yet families still hid secrets within their own walls. Historians still argue whether those laws ever truly protected the most vulnerable. At the dish pit, the industrial vent rumbles, drowning out whispers. You imagine the motor's drone swallowing the child's hushed breaths. Forensic historians note that in the 1920s, attic hideouts thrived because coal-fired furnace noise masked footsteps, an eerie parallel in this modern kitchen. But debate simmers over whether ambient noise truly conceals or simply delays discovery. By 9:22 p.m., the child's patience frays. You sense it in the sudden silence, a missing giggle that once punctuated the air. But the dinner symphony swells on, orders shouted, plates scraped, cups rattled. The child presses their palm to a panel, rough plaster greeting tender skin, then squeezes through the gap as it snaps back into place with a quiet thud. Staff shuffle into the storeroom, boxes shift, someone sighs. You hear a faint whimper but chalk it up to the wind in the vents. The red rubber ball from section 1 sits in the shadows, dusty but intact, likely nudging the child toward their fate. A fringe claim suggests the ball rolled of its own accord, guided by something unseen. You return to tables, empty dishes in hand, the routine pulling you back into its current. Glasses clink, silverware sings, and no one notices the child's absence. Modern acoustic forensics could isolate that overlooked thud, but here, no one pauses to listen. Instead, the evening rolls on, indifferent. By midnight, the missing child becomes more than a break in routine, it's the silence that follows the last order. Investigators will later trace the path through the joists, each misaligned panel a breadcrumb. You remember the extractor fan's lullaby, the jasmine-tinged incense scent, and realize that tragedies hinge on what we choose not to see, and on the spaces we mistake for empty. You slip out the back door just after midnight, the kitchen lights dimming behind you like eyelids closing. The alley yawns ahead, narrow and slick with last night's rain. You press your palm against the cool brick wall, feeling the rough mortar imprint beneath your fingertips, as if the alley itself is aware of the tragedy still pulsing inside the restaurant. A solitary street lamp casts a pale pool of light on crumpled cardboard boxes and discarded takeout containers. You inhale the sharp tang of spilled soy sauce mingled with damp paper, and the city seems to pause, every distant siren a muted plea for attention. Footsteps echo behind you. The parents stagger into view, the mother's silk blouse soaked with perspiration, the father's shirt smeared with leftover grease. Their voices carry in hoarse bursts, her soft sobs catching in the night air, his desperate calls sounding like a broken radio signal. Xiao Ming. Xiao Ming. They shout, using the child's nickname with reverence and fear. You can't help but shiver at the echo, imagining those pleas bouncing off the corrugated metal dumpster lids, swallowed by the city's unfeeling heartbeat. They split up, he heads left toward the storeroom, she veers right into the service alley, while you follow in the center, drawn by the mournful cadence of their voices. The father pushes past a stack of empty rice sacks, tossing aside a stray shipping label that flutters like a broken flag. In 1893, the French Charite introduced the dragnet search tactic for missing persons, mobilizing entire city precincts. Here, it's just these two figures stumbling through shadows, no official backstop to catch them if they fall. Historians still argue whether those early dragnet methods ever truly improved recovery rates or simply spread fear through communities. You duck beneath a hanging pipe, its surface slick with condensation, and glimpse the mother at the end of the alley. She kneels beside a discarded child's rain boot, bright yellow, half filled with gritty mud. You recognize it instantly, the matching boot from the pair found above the ceiling panel. A fringe whisper among local food bloggers claimed the boot sometimes reappeared in odd spots, resting on a windowsill, tucked under a chair, before vanishing again in the next shift change. You crouch beside her, noting the boot's scuffed toe and faded cartoon bear decal. It feels like a breadcrumb from a fairy tale that ended in heartbreak. The father's voice crackles over a discarded radio in the storeroom. "Honey, I found a red rubber ball." You recall that same ball lodged in plaster dust back in section 1. He holds it triumphantly, as if a child's toy could anchor hope. You join him and shine your flashlight on the ball, its bright sheen incongruous against the grimy cardboard crates. The beam picks out faint fingerprints in dried plaster dust, preserved like ghostly etchings. Mainstream forensics adopted fingerprint classification in 1903 after Sir Edward Henry's system revolutionized identification. Here, those prints on a toy might unlock the child's final hours. You stand, torch in one hand, ball in the other, listening as the couple converges again under the flickering light. They whisper to each other in rapid Cantonese, voices thick with fear, before turning to you as if you hold the last puzzle piece. The mother raises a trembling finger toward the ceiling hatch above a stack of oil barrels. You shine the light upward, the hatch sits ajar, its latch broken. You taste adrenaline against the back of your throat as you realize they've been searching floor to ceiling, literally. You climb onto a crate, knees trembling. The planks creak beneath your weight, heartbeats drumming in symphony with shifting wood. Above the hatch, the ceiling tile bows inward, a shallow curve that wasn't there before. You push it aside, revealing the hollow space where the child once hid. The fragrance of jasmine tea drifts down, mingling with the rank odor of stale cooking oil. You reach in and lift a bit of torn fabric, a sliver of the shirt described in the case file. It slips through your fingers like ash. Outside, a distant horn blares, a bus idling at the end of the alley. You can't tell whether it's sympathy or indifference. The parents wait at the hatch, breath held, as if you're on the brink of delivering a verdict. You whisper, "He wasn't here," and the mother's lips part in a silent wail, as if her breath has been stolen. The father's knees buckle, he drops the red ball, its hollow thump swallowed by shadows. You guide them back into the dining room, stepping around overturned chairs and a single broken plate that glints like a severed memory on the terrazzo floor. The extractor fan up high creaks into life, offering a mechanical sigh that feels like a dirge. In 1929, Chicago's first organized rooftop searches for missing persons utilized signal flares and floodlights, grand gestures of urgency. Here, the only illumination is the stuttering fluorescence above, unreliable as hope. Back in the storeroom, you find yourself tracing each footstep in plaster-dusted tiles, tiny, partial prints that end abruptly at the base of a shipping crate. You crouch to follow their path, the dust has settled into a faint outline, as though the child tiptoed toward the hatch. Beneath the stores, rows of canned bamboo shoots stand sentinel, their labels unreadable in the half-light. The child likely passed between these silent sentries, unseen and unheard. The parents kneel beside you, their shoulders heaving. They pass back and forth the torn fabric and the red ball, relics of a night spun from innocence and despair. You close your eyes, picturing how the child must have felt, cold air whistling through the gaps, the distant hum of the neon sign above flickering like a heartbeat. A faint rustle interrupts you, a busboy emerges from the kitchen door, tray in hand, blinking at the scene. He swallows, voice cracking, What happened? He hadn't heard the midnight calls or felt the weight of those frantic pleas. You realize how easily routine blinds us, how the everyday bustle muffles the extraordinary. You rise, dusting plaster from your knees and gloves, and guide the parents toward the front of the house. The dining room lies silent, tables upended, yellow tape crisscrossing the entrance. Patrons who lingered have long since fled, leaving behind half-drunk cups of tea and the faint echo of laughter that never returned. You pause under the red lanterns, imagining them swaying in a breeze you can't feel, mourning alongside you. In the distance, a squad car pulls up, lights flashing in purple-blue arcs that slice through the darkness. Investigators spill out, clipboards in hand, ready to catalog every detail you've just uncovered. You hand over the red ball and the fabric swatch, watching them record each in their notebooks. A forensic technician kneels to photograph the dust prints, angle by angle, lens capturing fragments of tragedy. They will later compare these prints to the tiles pulled from the ceiling, hoping for a timeline as precise as the second hand on a watch. You step back into the alley one last time, the parents' renewed sobs soft against the backdrop of city hum. The hive of neon signs and traffic noise seems to pulse in tandem with your pulse. You inhale the damp air, knowing that midnight searches once relied on night vision goggles in the 1970s, long before thermal imaging became standard. Historians still argue whether those early devices truly improved recovery rates or merely offered a false sense of security. A final fringe tidbit flutters into your mind. Some say the child's laughter still echoes faintly at midnight near the storeroom hatch, a recording of innocence looped in hidden speakers, placed by pranksters to haunt the guilty. You glance back up at the ceiling panels, now sealed, and wonder whether the echoes you'll carry forward are theirs or your own. You turn toward the neon glow of the main street, footsteps leading you out of the alley's cradle of sorrow. The city hum returns full force, indifferent and alive, while behind you lies a story stitched in dust and broken toys, a story that began in laughter and ended in silence. You step beneath the flickering neon haze that bathes the restaurant's entrance in electric pink and green, the yellow crime scene tape snapping softly against your boots. The night air carries a sharp whiff from the extractor fan above, mingled with the faint tang of jasmine tea and stale cooking oil, a sensory cocktail that presses against your senses. You pause on the terrazzo floor, feeling the cool flecks of marble crunch beneath your soles, as uniformed officers fan out in measured arcs, their flashlights slicing through shadowy corners. An officer kneels beside the lowered ceiling hatch you first pried open, placing a numbered evidence marker by the warped tile. You crouch low to watch her carefully bag a fragment of broken plaster in a sealed paper sleeve. Nearby, a forensic technician adjusts a tripod-mounted LED array, its harsh glare illuminating a dust-lined joist. In 1932, the FBI opened its first forensic crime laboratory at Quantico, standardizing techniques for evidence analysis, practices still echoed tonight as every fingerprint dusting and photograph swatch follows protocols born nearly a century ago. Historians still argue whether centralized labs improved justice or introduced new biases, but here the scene unfolds with almost ritual precision. You drift toward the evidence board propped on an easel by the kitchen hatch, where Polaroids of the red rubber ball, the yellow rain boot, and the torn fabric form a grim storyboard. A detective steps forward, clipboard in hand, barking gentle instructions into a handheld radio. His voice is even, practiced, yet you catch a flash of something like wonder in his eyes as he compares the plaster chip in his gloved hand to the magnified image taped above. He jots notes with deliberate strokes, cataloging each detail, chip A1, curvature matched to panel 4B. It feels like watching a sculptor assemble a mosaic from shattered shards. Across the room, another officer kneels by a chalk outline of the hatch's perimeter, measuring angles with a protractor and marking each degree with chalk dust that swirls in the crimson neon. You inhale the sharp tang of chalk and jasmine, a curious blend that dances across your tongue. Nearby, a sergeant places small evidence flags around a tripod where the CCTV recorder stood, the timestamp frozen at 9:02 p.m., the moment the child's silhouette slipped into darkness. A fringe rumor whispers that one detective insisted the neon sign's flicker spelled out XM in Morse code just before the hatch was pried open, a homage to the child's nickname, but no official report mentions anything so poetic. You drift toward the witness area, cordoned off by additional tape. Diners who stayed late sit on folding chairs, clutching thermoses of jasmine tea as officers move between them with polite, muted questions. You catch snippets. Describe what you heard at midnight. Did you notice anything unusual in the storeroom? A waiter, still in his uniform, folds his hands in his lap, eyes distant. You lean close and hear him whisper that he thought he heard a faint giggle from above the hatch just before closing, a detail so delicate it might shatter if spoken too loudly. At a small table, a uniformed detective thumbs through a witness logbook, ticking off entries with a ballpoint pen. He stretches out the names. Mr. Chen noted rattling at 9:15 p.m., Ms. Liu mentioned a faint sob at 12:03 a.m., Mr. Alvarez heard nothing. Every statement is compressed into stark bullet points, each one a thread in the tapestry they're weaving. You imagine the witness statements piling up like pages of a diary, each memory tinted by personal bias and ambient noise. Modern procedural manuals warn that witness recollections can shift like sand, yet here they rely on them to form the narrative's backbone. Historians still argue whether eyewitness testimony should hold equal weight alongside forensic evidence, and you wonder which side tonight's investigators will favor. Your foot nudges a discarded shell of a takeout box, and you realize the forensics team has staked out every inch of the storeroom floor. Glossy evidence markers hover over faint footprints in dust, mapped in a grid with string lines running between them like tiny tightropes. You stare at a lone footprint, partial and smeared, as if the child paused mid-step before vanishing. A technician sweeps a slender brush over the print's edge, coaxing dust into a black-topped vial, and the jar clicks shut with a finality that reverberates in the hush. Nearby, a uniformed officer sets up a mobile fingerprint scanner against the restaurant's back door, dusting the handle until latent prints emerge in stark white. You watch as the scanner projects the swirling ridges onto a small screen, each loop and whirl magnified. The uniformed detective from earlier nods, murmuring, "Good match," to those lifted from the ceiling joist. His tone is subdued, no triumph, only a solemn acknowledgement that each scrape and ridge carries the echo of a small life. You wander to the corner where a menu board lists the day's specials, now repurposed as a map for marking evidence zones. Yellow string loops around tables and beams, each intersection labeled in block letters, Zone A, Zone B, Zone C. The officer in charge points to Zone B and notes in his notebook, ceiling hatch, plaster fragments, print residue. The glow from his penlight reflects off the laminated menu, illuminating photos of sweet and sour pork that now seem jarringly bright. A sergeant's quietly humming phone buzzes with an incoming message, "Coroner en route, ETA 20 minutes." You feel the pulse of anticipation in the room, as though everyone is pausing to draw a single collective breath. In 1829, Sir Robert Peel established the London Metropolitan Police, pioneering modern patrol tactics. Similarly, tonight's methodical mapping of evidence zones harks back to Peel's emphasis on systematic street presence and record-keeping. Yet debate simmers. Historians still argue whether Peel's rural beat model translates effectively to indoor crime scenes cloaked in neon. Above you, the ceiling panels hang like silent observers. A forensic lighting specialist adjusts a cold light projector to highlight dust trails on their underside. Each speck becomes a constellation of possibility, waiting to be decoded. You remember the red rubber ball you saw lodged in plaster dust in Section 1, now bagged in an evidence pouch swaying gently on a folding chair. It sits between rolls of caution tape and laminated witness affidavits, a poignant reminder of innocence crushed. Soft murmurs fill the dining room. The coroner's been idling outside, hushed conversations about toxicology protocols, and the click of cameras capturing every angle of the hatch. You drift among the officers, absorbing the choreography of their movements. From dust tapping to blueprint sketching, each step feels rehearsed, like the overture of a meticulous symphony. Finally, a tall detective with a clipboard approaches you, nodding toward the hatch. "We'll need you to sign off on the scene log," he says, pen extended. You glance at the logbook, rows of timestamps and initials mapping every specialist who's entered and exited this kitchen-turned-crime scene. You ink your signature with a soft flourish, feeling the weight of the moment settle in your chest. As you stand, the neon's hum steadies, and you sense the scene shifting from frantic investigation to careful preservation. You step back, letting the forensic team reclaim the space, each handing off tasks like runners in a relay race. The evidence board stands tall, blue string weaving connections between photos and specimens, each line a bridge across the unknown. You slip out of the main room, boots echoing on the terrazzo, leaving behind the sterile glow of flashlights and the muted chatter of investigators. Outside, the city breathes indifferently, lights twinkling in passing cars. Behind you lies a meticulously mapped crime scene under neon lights, where dust, fingerprints, and whispered testimonies converge into the first true outline of what happened to the child above. You slip down the narrow corridor, the hum of overhead fluorescence matching the thrum in your chest. The air smells faintly of antiseptic mixed with lingering jasmine tea, a peculiar reminder of the child's hidden world above the kitchen. You pause outside the first interview room, where a single bulb swings over a metal table. Through the glass, you glimpse the mother seated upright, hands folded in her lap, her floral dress pristine despite hours of questioning. A detective reads her the Miranda rights in a low, steady tone. In 1966, the Miranda decision mandated that suspects be informed of their rights before custodial interrogation, forever changing police procedure. Historians still argue whether these warnings reduced coercion or simply added ritual to a broken system. You push open the door and follow the detective's gesture toward the mother. Her voice is calm, each word measured as if she speaks through a finely tuned microphone. "I was in the dining room," she says, eyes steady on the detective's badge. "I checked every booth, every corner. I even called out his nickname, Xiao Ming, twice." Her tone lacks tremor. You imagine the creak of that ceiling panel in Section 1, where the red rubber ball nestled in dust. She never mentions the storeroom's ajar door or the coiling steam in the kitchen vents. Instead, she recounts pouring tea for closing staff, gently cradling the pot like a lifeline. You notice a single strand of hair falling across her cheek. She pushes it back with a deliberate grace. A fringe whisper drifts in your mind. Some say she once sang the child's favorite lullaby into the vents, believing the melody would guide him back to safety. One detective even claimed he heard her hum Twinkle, Twinkle under his breath as she answered questions, as though addressing a ghostly confidant above. You glance upward, imagining the ceiling tiles trembling with her soft notes. The detective jots notes, his pen scratching across a legal pad. He asks about timelines. When was the last time you saw him? And did anyone else check the ceiling hatch? Her replies loop back to the dining floor, no mention of that cramped ceiling space. You sense a practiced control, as though she is forgiving her own memory to create a seamless narrative. Outside, the hallway clock's second hand clicks like a metronome, marking each passing heartbeat. You step into the second interview room. The door thuds shut behind you, sealing out distant voices and clinking dishes. Here the father sits slumped on a chair, collar stained and face slick with perspiration. His tie is loosened, and he rocks forward, clutching the table's edge. He doesn't look up as the detective repeats the Miranda warning. You feel the tension in his shoulders, knuckles white where he grips the edge of the table. His first words tumble out in a rush. "I saw him crawl under the stew station at 9:15, I swear, I was loading supplies in the storeroom, then I heard a thud, like a pan hitting the floor." He jerks his head toward the ceiling, as if the panels might answer him. Then his story shifts. "No, wait, he was at the ramen bar with the server, she said she saw him reach for her hair clip. I ran out to pull him back, but the hatch it was already closed." His voice cracks, time slipping as he scrambles to reconcile each detail. You recall the father's frantic midnight search in Section 5, the way he tossed aside shipping labels like broken promises. Now he mangles his timeline, confused by his own desperation. In criminal investigations, police often use the read technique, developed in the late 1940s, to detect deception through behavioral cues, though historians still argue whether its high-pressure tactics yield truth or false confessions. Here, the father's sweat-damp forehead and darting eyes become a tableau of guilt, fear, or perhaps genuine bewilderment. You lean forward, the detective's voice low as he probes contradictions. You told dispatch you were in the back alley at midnight, but the feed from your phone shows you near the front entrance then. Can you explain? The father's lips part, but no words come. His gaze flickers to a security camera array mounted high on the wall, as if pleading for digital absolution. The detective's pen hovers over the pad, and the soft scratch of ink feels heavier than any confession. You watch the father's chest rise and fall, each breath a ragged drumbeat. He clenches his fists, one palm smearing tea-stained fingerprints across the table. The detective nods, then slides a printed timeline across the metal surface, time-stamped notes from kitchen staff, CCTV stills, dispatch logs. The father's eyes trace the printed hours, 8:57, 9:02, 9:15, 12:03. He swallows, voice barely a whisper, I thought I checked every place. I didn't think to look up. The words hang in the fluorescent glare, spotlighting his regret. In the corner, you notice an evidence board updated with colored pins linking her calm answers to his chaotic recollections. A string of red yarn arcs between the mother's timeline and the father's, suggesting a gap in their stories. You think back to the parents' ledger in Section 3, the fix-up withdrawals, and wonder whether desperation fractured their memories, or their loyalties. Before you leave, you catch the detective's quiet aside to the officer, "We'll need them both under polygraph soon." You shiver at the suggestion. Lie detectors rose to prominence in the 1920s, once heralded as infallible but now criticized for inaccuracy. Historians still argue whether polygraphs prove anything more than a subject's fear of being caught. You imagine the soft click of sensors and the mechanical rustle of paper charts, and wonder what the machine might record if it could hear the child's heartbeat echoing through those very wires. You step back into the hallway, the air cool against your skin. A faint hum from the ceiling vents greets you, an echo of the mother's whispered lullaby and the chap of the father's frantic footsteps. There's a quiet camaraderie in the corridor. The detective allows you a nod as though you share the weight of this fractured account. In the distance, you hear the mother's calm voice drift through the door again, repeating "I checked every corner," even as the father's room echoes with denial. You breathe in the flattened jasmine fragrance, the antiseptic sting, the brittle scrape of your own shoes against tile. The interviews leave you suspended between two worlds, the composed facade of maternal calm and the jagged edges of paternal panic. Each narrative is a shard of truth, glittering with possibility and reflection, waiting for the forensic weave to stitch them into something whole. You walk toward the break room where staff quietly sip tea, the hush reminding you of the hush above the ceiling panels. They exchange wary glances as if sensing that the truth lies somewhere between those two rooms. You pause at the doorway, catching a glimpse of the red lantern glow through the frosted glass, an emblem of warmth now tinged with sorrow. In that moment, you realize the investigation pivots on reconciling these opposing recollections. The mother's unruffled poise and the father's raw panic form the twin pillars of the story, yet between them lies the unanswered question: what did they notice, and when did they choose not to say it? You exit the room, footsteps echoing down the corridor, each step a reminder that truth often hides in the space between calm and chaos. You slip back into the dining room as the forensic team shifts focus from the hatch to the ceiling panels overhead, the scent of plaster dust wisping through the air like ghostly confetti. Your ears tune to the soft scrape of a specialized brush coaxing flecks of debris into a sterile tray, each tap resonating like a muted drumbeat in a cathedral of crime. You lean close to the technician's table, where glass vials stand at attention, filled with minutiae of tragedy, granules of aged mortar, stray hair fibers, and faint smudges of soot that trace a path across warped tile. Your fingertips itch to feel the way dust settles, an almost sacred ritual of quiet observation. In 1910, Edmund Locard famously codified the exchange principle at the Lyon Police Laboratory, asserting that every contact leaves a trace, a cornerstone of modern forensics that you can practically taste in every dusty mote. Historians still argue whether Locard's exchange principle applies equally in all forensic contexts or overstates the infallibility of microscopic evidence, yet here it guides each gloved fingertip as investigators catalog patterns in the ceiling cavity. A soft beam from an ultraviolet lamp cuts across the room, revealing a constellation of fibers that glow in ghostly blues and greens. The lead technician murmurs that some fibers match the child's sweater, tiny yarn fragments that clung to rough plaster before falling into shadow. A quirky rumor whispers among late-night true crime podcasts that those glowing fibers once arranged themselves in a heart shape when viewed under blacklight, a fringe detail that, while unconfirmed, adds a layer of eerie intimacy to the scene. You crouch beside a magnifying camera mounted on an articulated arm, its lens zooming in on a faint groove where a hair strand lodged itself in the tile's grain. The camera's hum blends with the extractor fan's lullaby, creating an ASMR-like tapestry that draws you deeper into analysis. You notice a smear of dark residue streaking across the panel's edge, perhaps soot from a neglected vent, or residual grease from a midnight snack spilled in the ceiling crawlspace. Every stain demands a question: was this left by accident, or does it map the child's final journey? On a nearby whiteboard, diagrams illustrate the dust distribution across concentric panels. Zone nearest the hatch bears the densest accumulation, while Zone C toward the kitchen exhaust shows only a thin veil of plaster powder. A forensic artist sketches overlay lines, connecting each deposit to likely points of impact. You imagine the child's small foot brushing against those tiles, sending microparticles spiraling like miniature comets before settling into oblivion. In mainstream forensics, analysts sometimes reconstruct movement based on dust displacement, an approach first systematically applied in the 1930s at Scotland Yard, yet the method's reliability remains debated. Historians still argue whether early experiments truly validated motion reconstruction from debris patterns or simply offered suggestive scenarios. Your gaze drifts to a tiny petri dish labeled Tile 4B, where a delicate flake of plaster rests under a drop of liquid reagent. The reagent causes the flake to swell slightly, revealing fine cross-sectional layers, each a record of stress on the panel. Here, warped grain patterns hint at a momentary bowing when weight pressed down from above. A detective later will interpret that bow as evidence of a struggle, though some forensic critics maintain that ambient temperature changes can cause similar warping over time, another point of scholarly contention. You inhale the scent of jasmine incense still lingering from earlier rituals, mingled now with the sterile tang of isopropyl alcohol used to preserve these fragile samples. Each vial is meticulously logged, time, date, collector's initials, ensuring a chain of custody as unbroken as the pattern of dust lines above. You spot a stray eyebrow hair in a specimen tray, slender and auburn against the pale background. The lab report will later confirm it doesn't match the parent's DNA, hinting at a curious outsider's presence or perhaps the child's own wandering locks. A fringe theory flits through your mind. Late-night bloggers speculate that a secret camera installed above the panels once recorded the child's silhouette, but the footage was corrupted when the sushi roll delivery bumped the DVR at 11:43 p.m. No official report mentions this glitch, yet the rumor persists as a testament to our hunger for lost evidence. You stand and stretch, noticing how the overhead lights cast long shadows across the evidence board. Photographs of the red rubber ball and yellow boot from earlier sections now sit flanked by magnified dust trails, each line annotated with arrowed notes. A forensic anthropologist circles a cluster of hair fibers, connecting them with colored yarn to a hairbrush found near the kitchen sink. That hairbrush had been bagged as evidence in Section 5, a callback that tightens the narrative, drawing threads from one fragment to another. Behind you, the forensic chemist brings over a small vial of fluorescent dye, ready to treat soot samples from the ceiling joist. The dye glows like liquid neon when exposed to UV, revealing hidden streaks that map the child's path across the beams. You picture the tiny footprints they must have left, each ridge imprint recorded in minute detail. In the annals of forensic history, Soot analysis dates back to early 20th century railway crash investigations, but its application in indoor crime scenes remains a niche specialty. Historians still argue whether soot mapping offers reliable directional clues or risks overlaying subjective interpretation. A pale luminescence from the refrigerator in the corner casts an otherworldly glow over the tiled floor as you approach a high-resolution scanner. The technician places a small sample of ceiling fiber beneath its glass pane, then initiates a scan that transforms microscopic patterns into a digital map. The scanner's quiet whir reminds you of a knight's sword being drawn, precise, inevitable. Later, analysts will overlay that map onto a 3D model of the ceiling's framework, recreating the chamber where the child hid. The very idea sends a shiver through you, a virtual reconstruction that traps laughter and tears in geometric lines. Your fingers brush against a sample bag labeled dust from vent 2. Inside, pale gray powder glints with metallic flecks, traces of kitchen exhaust that wafted into the crawlspace. The chemist explains that those flecks match a type of industrial oil used only in the restaurant's main fryer, ruling out drift from nearby businesses. Such associative evidence echoes chain-of-custody principles developed during Prohibition-era raids, when authorities first began linking seized contraband to specific stills. Yet even here, critics question whether such matches prove contact or merely coincide with common manufacturing practices, yet another point where historians still argue whether comparative analysis overstates certainty. You close your eyes against the scanner's hum, letting each faint noise settle into your mind like a soft echo chamber. Every sample in those vials becomes a messenger from the past, whispering fragments of a child's final hours. The pervasive hush punctuates every clink of glass, every breath drawn by magnifying lenses. You breathe in unspoken stories, the way dust clung to fabric, the trajectory of falling plaster, the silent orchestration of light and shadow. In that hush, you realize how this case pivots on microevidence, a breadcrumb trail of the unseen. The forensic clues in dust are a silent witness, bridging the gap between hidden tragedy and spoken truth. And as you step back from the table, you feel the weight of every tiny particle that tells a story far larger than itself. You push through the back door into a damp twilight that hangs low over the narrow alley behind the restaurant. The scent of jasmine tea and cooking oil fades into the soft chill of early evening air. You pause as a faint sound drifts from above your head where the ceiling hatch once lived. It is a low keening cry that could be wind slipping through cracks or something far more unsettling. Neighbors say they hear soft weeping after midnight when the street is empty and the neon glow from the restaurant's sign flickers like a tired pulse. This is the heart of the local folklore that wraps this tragedy in layers of superstition. In East Asian traditions, spirit beliefs often assign restless ghosts to places of violence or neglect. In ancient texts, a spirit trapped where it suffered without proper rites would wander in sorrow until appeased. Historians still argue whether these stories spread from Buddhist funeral rites into popular haunted house legends or began elsewhere in folk imagination. Here, the attic space above the kitchen panels is said to hold a lost child spirit seeking justice or perhaps craving comfort it never received. You step onto a damp crate outside the main door, fingertips brushing cool metal. A glass lantern hanging by a rusted nail swings and tinkles in an unseen breeze. It reminds you of the small shrine in the corner office that the parents tended every new moon. The shrine once held incense sticks and little red ribbons meant to guide benign spirits away from harm. Locals said that when flames winked at odd angles, it was proof the shrine worked. Some swear that after the accident the shrine glowed faintly on its own as if powered by an unseen presence. A stray cat slinks past, for bristling as it peers up toward the vents. You feel its gaze drawn to something you cannot see. According to neighborhood lore, the cat had once hissed and arched at an empty ceiling tile as though afraid of what waited on the other side. You shiver recalling the warped panel you forced open in section 1 where the child lay unnoticed. It feels as though every nail and joist above might hold a secret lament. You drift along the alley wall toward the storeroom entrance where metal lockers stand silent. Cracked tiles underfoot catch a stray beam from a distant street lamp. You recall that in Victorian England spirit believers used Ouija boards to make contact with the other side. That was in the 1850s when spiritualism swept salons and drawing rooms. Mainstream police dismissed these methods, but the fascination spread far and wide. Here a fringe group of internet ghost hunters claimed they once detected an audio recording of soft footsteps and crying in a video posted to a forum. The file had no time stamp and was quickly removed, but echoes of that upload linger in hushed gossip. You step back into the main dining room where tables stand stowed for the night. Chairs rest upside down on tabletops as if frozen mid-gesture. In the half-light you think you see small hand prints on the underside of the bar counter. The bartender from Section 2 once told you he wiped that sticky surface dozens of times, but the prints reappeared each morning. He called it a prank until the day he heard a child's giggle from the ceiling vents. After that he kept quiet and avoided late shifts. You lean your shoulder against a cool tile wall and recall the lantern from Section 5 that lit the alley with flickering flames the night the parents searched for their son. They had trailed toward this same corner before realizing those crying sounds belonged to no child alive. A local shop owner claimed she saw a translucent silhouette of a small figure hovering over the dumpster. In old newspaper clippings from the early 1900s, reporters chronicled similar ghost sightings at abandoned orphanage attics. Those tales fueled public fear and spurred regulations on building inspections. Historians still argue whether such reports reflected real phenomena or mass hysteria sparked by sensational journalism. A server enters through the kitchen door humming a tune you recognize from Section 7. She stiffens when she sees you and lowers her gaze. When you ask about the crying, she hesitates, then admits she fears closing alone. She says she sometimes finds small stones arranged in a circle beneath the ceiling hatch. No one else sees the stones and they vanish by dawn. She told the parents but was told to keep it secret to avoid scaring customers or police. You thread your way around the overturned chairs and note the faintest hint of jasmine incense in the air. It seems stronger here than anywhere else. You remember in Section 3 how the parents claimed those incense burns kept away bad luck. Now you wonder if they tried to placate something they barely understood. In Chinese mythology, offerings of rice, wine and paper money serve to calm wandering souls. Yet some scholars still debate whether these rituals ease grief or simply reinforce collective denial. Your flashlight cuts a narrow beam across the ceiling tiles where damp spots have formed. Mold freckles speckle the panels like constellations swallowed by shadow. You step onto a ladder propped against a wall and reach for a panel that seems darker than its neighbors. Your fingertips find nothing but cold wood. You pull it down and catch a waft of damp plaster and old tears. Beneath the panel you see a child's drawing etched into the joist in soft pencil. It depicts a small figure holding a balloon next to a tall building. The lines are heavy with longing. You did not pry this board open in earlier sections and you cannot hide your shock at finding a hidden message. That sketch ties together stray clues from the ledger in Section 3, the red boot in Section 5 and the ball in Section 1. It suggests that the child climbed up here intentionally and left a farewell. A quirky rumor on folklore blogs held that children can sense spirits and sometimes follow them into hidden spaces. You wonder if that was what happened before tragedy struck. You climb down from the ladder just as the building custodian appears. He carries a broom and a half-empty bottle of cleaning detergent. He tells you he replaced burned-out bulbs above the hatch twice last week because they blew without explanation. He said every time he did the ceiling panel would be slightly ajar the next day. He refused overtime after that and now only works mornings. He swears the idea of ghosts once made him laugh, but now he locks the hatch from his side before leaving. You follow him through the kitchen and feel the hum of the extractor fan as it pulls grease-laden air through the vents. Above you the labyrinth of ductwork seems alive. The custodian pauses at the door that leads back to the dining room and looks up. He rubs his arms the way someone might after a cold breeze passes through. He glances down at the ladder you used and then at you. He says nothing more and walks on. Standing alone in the half-empty kitchen you ponder all you have seen. The shrines, the incense ashes, the whispered giggles and the pencil drawing all echo across time and noise. A child's world turned tomb has become a haunted chamber echoing with spirits, or at least with our fears. superstitions often arise where facts fail to answer our questions. Historians still argue whether ghost lore reflects genuine cultural memory or simply a way to cope with pain. Here you feel that tension in every shiver and every creak above your head. You scoop up a handful of plaster dust from the work table and let it fall through your fingers. In that granular cascade you see 1,000 untold stories. You realize that for the community these superstitions bind them to the case as much as any forensic report or courtroom testimony could. The ghosts they imagine may or may not dance between these rafters, but their presence shapes every investigation step and every sleepless night. You switch off your flashlight and step back into the dining room. The yellow tape lines the entry like a page torn from a nightmare. The neon sign outside sputters on and off, casting long black shadows across tabletops. You feel the invisible weight of unseen eyes watching from the dark ceiling grid. Whether spirits linger or simply memory itself curls in every beam you cannot say. But you know the past here is alive in ways both eerie and intimate. You silence the distant echo of weeping in your mind and brace yourself for what comes next. You settle into a quiet booth beneath the flickering open sign as the restaurant's hum fades into memory. The air still carries a faint trace of sesame oil and jasmine tea, but your mind drifts to Paris in 1888, when an attic murder shook the city's soul. Back then a child was found hidden in a mansard roof, discovered only after neighbors complained of soft sobs in the night. That case prompted the prefecture of police to launch one of its first systematic urban crime investigations, mapping every rooftop and chimney pipe in a desperate search for answers. In that Belle Époque era the press splashed headlines across broadsheets, turning household horrors into public spectacle. You imagine the flicker of gas lamps casting long shadows across wooden beams, much like the neon glow here sketches dark shapes across ceiling tiles. Historians still argue whether that Paris attic tragedy truly led to stricter building codes or simply fueled sensational journalism that preyed on public fear. You taste the coolness of your coffee mug as you recall how detectives in 1888 used early photography to document the attic's bloodstains, a breakthrough that laid groundwork for crime scene archives worldwide. The Victorians prized daguerreotypes, and each plate captured dust motes dancing in sunbeams. Here you picture forensic techs snapping digital images of plaster fragments, each pixel a bridge across time to those first photographs taken under oil lamplight. A quirky rumor persists among late-night true crime forums that in Paris a secret society of butlers whispered of hidden passages linking attic floors to cellar wine cellars. They claimed moonlight would slide across hidden panels, guiding children toward safety or something darker. No official record mentions such passages, yet the urban legend clings like moss to old rooftops. You shiver thinking of that lore echoing now in this restaurant's crawlspace, where a child once played hide and seek and fate turned the game tragic. You breathe in the faint smell of damp plaster and notice a single wisp of incense smoke drifting from the nearby shrine, a callback to earlier days when parents burned joss paper to calm restless spirits. In Paris they once laid offerings at Madeleine Church for the murdered child, scattering lilies on the marble floor. You imagine petals sliding across cold stone, each bloom a plea for mercy. Here a single red candle on the counter flickers in tribute, its flame dancing like a heartbeat against the tile. Your fingers trace the edge of the evidence board, where photos from this case hover beside printed clippings from 1888. You picture the Parisian detective robed in frock coat, notebook in hand, jotting witness accounts beneath gaslight. Mainstream crime historians note that fingerprint classification would not arrive until 2 decades later, making those early attic investigations reliant on witness testimony and inked palm prints. Today you see prints lifted from ceiling joists, each swirl and loop cataloged to match no one but the child and the parents. In a dusty corner you spot an old leather satchel, a prop from a 19th century reenactment staged at the Louvre. Fringe enthusiasts believe that satchel might once have carried secret letters accusing influential families of sheltering criminals in their attics. They say a faded note slipped from its pocket once read "Heed the attic door." No museum catalog confirms this, but the idea sends a tingle down your spine. You imagine that same warning echoing through these rafters as you uncovered the child above the dining room. You lean back, letting the booth's vinyl upholstery creak beneath you. A server glides past, carrying a tray of dumplings, her movements as precise as a ballet dancer. You notice how her steps echo in the hush, each footfall a drumbeat in a silent symphony. In 1888, Paris detectives occasionally tapped panels with small hammers to listen for hollow cavities, an acoustic technique that guided them through labyrinthine rooftops. Here you recall the faint creak you heard when that ceiling tile first gave way, as if inviting your touch. Historians still argue whether acoustic forensics ever truly pinpointed hidden spaces or merely offered suggestive clues that confirmed investigators' biases. You sip your coffee, its bitterness cutting through lingering sweetness, and ponder how history teaches us that ordinary routines can mask extraordinary crimes. The Belle Époque family who lost their child in Paris still appear in academic papers as a case study of media frenzy and urban fear. You think of the family here whose meals once nourished diners now overshadowed by tragedy. Both stories speak to the fragility of domestic spaces, where laughter and horror can coexist on the same floor. A late-night blog claims that in 1888 a servant cleaned the attic hatch twice, only to find it ajar again the next morning. The servant quit soon after, convinced the house was haunted. You remember the custodian who locked this hatch and refused overtime, haunted by unspoken pleas and events. The parallels stretch across continents and eras, binding past and present in a tapestry of hidden rooms and whispered cries. Your gaze returns to the neon sign outside, its colors bleeding through blinds onto the tiled floor. You imagine gaslight seeping through Paris shutters, the lamplighter's ladder swinging in the wind. You feel the weight of centuries of attic secrets pressing down, a reminder that some tragedies repeat until we learn their lessons. You lean forward and whisper to yourself that every age confronts its own attic murders. In Paris it was gaslit roofs and unregulated architecture. Here it is modern vents and blinking sensors. Yet in both cases a single moment of oversight, eyes not raised above dinner, sealed a child's fate. The question lingering in every vaulted ceiling is the same: what tiny creak must break our routine before we choose to look up? You let the words settle as you rise from the booth, the neon glow fading behind you. The restaurant holds its breath, caught between history and now. And you step into the night, carrying echoes of Paris and memories of this hidden chamber under your skin, determined never to ignore what lies just above. You step back beneath the paper lanterns where the neon glow meets the edge of your vision and you feel the weight of every rumor that has drifted through this space. The room is hushed now, but your mind buzzes with whispered fringe theories that swirl like incense smoke in the vents. Online sleuths have spun stories of secret hatchways leading to hidden rooms where illicit deals once took place, and they claim that the child became an unintended witness. You feel a chill imagining tiny footsteps tracing those covert passages while diners laughed below. A mainstream fact from criminal history reminds you that in the early 1900s ornate buildings often included servant tunnels and hidden doors meant for discreet movement. Historians still argue whether those passages were common in modest tenement homes or reserved for wealthy estates only. Here the restaurant's ceiling panels seem to conceal more than wiring and insulation, as if each square tile is a page in an unwritten conspiracy thriller. A quirky rumor tied to this tragedy insists that late at night a clandestine trafficking ring used the restaurant storeroom to move contraband through back hallways, and that the child stumbled onto one of these transfers. Some claim they saw a shadowy figure slip through the ceiling vents and vanish into the alley. You listen for any echo of that vanished stranger as you drift toward the rear exit. In a small filing cabinet you find hastily scrawled notes from anonymous tipsters pasted to the inside of a drawer. These notes sketch maps of locked doors behind the kitchen and suggest the parents were coerced by unseen figures into silence. A fringe podcast host even warned that the parents were part of a wider network of child exploiters hiding in plain sight. Historians still argue whether such broad-brush conspiracies divert attention from verifiable leads or expose real undercurrents of criminal enterprise. You recall that in 2011 the FBI dismantled a ring that trafficked victims through restaurant basements, and that case used coded menus as signals. You sense how those codes might have been stenciled under tables here, though no investigator has confirmed a single cipher hidden in the laminate. You step over the threshold where the child once roamed and feel the hum of the extractor fan swell with possibility. It sounds almost like a warning horn of a distant train. You follow the current of this hum into the storeroom where empty boxes lie stacked like monoliths. Some internet detectives claim those boxes once hid secret compartments. You test a seam with your fingertip and find only cardboard, but you imagine feeling a hollow space just behind. In mainstream investigations, polygraph results are often dismissed in court, yet that failed lie detector remains a talking point among true crime aficionados. Historians still argue whether polygraph machines record lies or merely capture stress responses that can be triggered by fear or trauma. Here you wonder if the parents ever took that test or if it was buried in sealed files. A fringe account insists that a hidden camera was installed above the ceiling and that corrupted footage captured the child playing among plaster shards, but the digital files were mysteriously wiped by an anonymous hacker known only as Raven. You consider how easily digital evidence can vanish forever while physical fragments remain trapped in evidence bags. You drift toward the evidence board where printed witness statements are tacked alongside crime scene photos. A yellow ball and a rain boot appear again as tokens in this tapestry of hints and half-truths. You recall the small sketch etched in pencil into the joist, and you wonder if that drawing was meant to guide someone through these panels or to mark a final farewell. In 2005, the Europol Task Force on Child Safety issued guidelines for securing crawl spaces and attics in public establishments, yet compliance varied across regions. This headline fact underscores how building standards and safety warnings sometimes fail to reach every locale. Historians still argue whether such guidelines truly prevented tragedies or simply offered officials a shield against liability. A local blogger alleges that neighbors once heard muffled voices in Cantonese and English arguing through the vent system at odd hours, and that one of those voices did not belong to the parents. This anonymous claim unsettles you more than any official report. You wander back into the dining room where tables sit in neat rows like empty pews waiting for a congregation. Your gaze settles on the ceiling grid and you imagine each tile as a witness to secrets that will never see the light of day. The hum of the neon sign outside builds to a steady pulse, as if in time with your heartbeat. You pause beneath the chandelier of paper lanterns and let your mind sift through every conspiracy theory you have encountered. The idea of a trafficking ring hides behind every whisper, the notion of secret tunnels coils in every shadow, yet you recognize how fringe lore can distract from paths that yield real evidence. In mainstream practice, detectives rely on verifiable data like timestamps, maps, and witness statements. Historians still argue whether over-reliance on technology blinds us to human intuition or whether intuition alone leads to bias and error. Here the balance between whispered rumor and documented fact feels as delicate as a single panel of plaster. You step toward the closed kitchen door and listen for any hint of movement above you. The ceiling vents hum and reply as if urging you to look up. One last fringe whisper drifts through your mind that the child's spirit lingers to guide someone toward hidden truths, but you steady yourself. You know the boundaries between legend and fact can blur in this hollow space. You let your hand rest on the door handle and feel the cool metal beneath your palm. You realize that no matter how enticing the fringe theories, they remain unverified threads in a tapestry that only grows more tangled with each new rumor. You inhale the mixed scents of oil and incense and steel yourself for the real work ahead, separating shadow from substance. You step through the doorway, leaving fringe theories and secret tunnel maps behind. In the hush you carry with you a single thought: what untold stories hide just above our everyday lives, and how many of us would dare to look up and face the unknown? You step out into the narrow street just as dusk settles, the sky shifting from orange to deep blue in a slow, somber fade. The restaurant's yellow tape flaps gently in the warm breeze, sounding like an anxious hush over the neighborhood. You walk beneath the flicker of a single street lamp that sputters on and off as if unsure it wants to bear witness. Across the street, residents linger on their stoops, drawn to the scene by equal parts dread and morbid curiosity. Their faces are lit by the pale glow of cell phones as they compare notes in low voices. In 1940, the Chicago Police Department was the first to use yellow crime tape to cordon off murder sites and keep bystanders back. That simple invention changed how communities engaged with violence and preserved scenes for investigators. Historians still argue whether the tape truly protected evidence or created an invisible wall that distanced the public from justice. You feel the tension in the air, as if the tape itself hums with unspoken questions. A neighbor across the street points toward the restaurant's neon sign, commenting that its red glow now seems harsh and accusatory. You recall how in Section 2 the late-night server said the sign's pulse once felt like a warning. Now that same pulse marks time for the community, each flicker a reminder of fear. You drift along the sidewalk, stepping over chalk messages left by local children. One reads Xiaoming Lives, scrawled in uneven block letters. Another simply says, "Why didn't you look up?" The kids who left these messages probably don't understand the gravity but sense the void the child's absence carved into their evenings. A quirky rumor among neighborhood bloggers is that the messages reappear overnight even after being scrubbed away. They whisper that some unseen hand writes them anew, a spectral graffiti artist refusing to let the story fade. You round the corner to the apartment complex where the landlord lives. He stands on his balcony, arms crossed, watching the scene below. His building leans slightly, windows open to catch the breeze, and you can smell jasmine incense drifting through one of them. He tells you that for 3 nights he heard soft sobbing that woke him around midnight. He thought it was the wind at first but now believes it was more than that. In 1892 the London Metropolitan Police began collecting witness testimonies door to door after a grisly murder in Whitechapel. That neighborhood practice informed modern community canvassing tactics. Yet historians still argue whether relying on scattered memories improved investigations or buried truth in a pile of conflicting accounts. You move to the corner newsstand where the proprietor offers you a jasmine tea from a thermos. You accept and feel the warmth seep into your palms. He explains that customers now avoid his stand after dark, the fear infecting every passerby. A red marker traces a series of fuel purchases that seem out of place for a restaurant owner. The father's gas receipts are logged at stations miles from the business district. Detectives suspect these trips may have served another purpose. You follow the line to a scanned receipt for a self-storage facility. The image shows packaging materials identical to those found in the storeroom. The implication is unsettling. In another cluster of notes you see details of credit card disputes where the mother contested charges weeks after they posted. Those disputes coincided with the night her alibi placed her in the dining room greeting customers. Now analysts questioned if she truly remembered her own movements or if she manipulated records to lend credibility to her version of events. Every reverse charge and every disputed statement adds to a tapestry of scrutiny that grows more ominous by the hour. A quirky detail emerges as you watch an investigator hold up a faded till tape. It shows a refund processed at 11:45 p.m. 2 nights before the incident. The cash drawer should have been empty then. The tape lists an item called spare part return. No official inventory records mention missing parts. You consider whether that entry references tools removed from the ceiling panel repairs or something far more troubling. You notice 2 detectives confer quietly over a report that lists loans from a local moneylender. The interest rates are astronomical. The couple appear as co-signers even though the lender's forms require a separate guarantor. Investigators suspect forgery. The loans show late payments covered by cash deposits whose origins remain unaccounted. You realize that the financial picture they are assembling could suggest a motive rooted in desperation or, grimly, a darker intent masked by economic hardship. As you step back you imagine how each spreadsheet row and each circled phone number shapes the narrative in the detectives' minds. The couple's finances and communications create a lattice of evidence that binds them to the unseen tragedy in the ceiling. You feel the growing tension in this room loaded with fiscal truths and hidden whispers. You know that every line item may bring the investigation closer to understanding whether parents could be complicit in a child's fate or simply victims of circumstance they never fully controlled. You step back into the interrogation room where detectives have gathered to pore over every facet of the parents' lives. The fluorescent lights hum overhead as you watch agents flip through binders bursting with bank statements, phone records, social media screenshots, and school enrollment forms. You feel the weight of scrutiny settling on the couple like a second skin, one stitched from judgment and suspicion. Their faces are pale, features drawn tight, and you can almost taste the tension in the stale air. From the moment investigators learned of the child's discovery in the ceiling, the net closed swiftly around the parents. They were ushered through a gauntlet of forensic interviews, polygraph proposals, and door-to-door canvasses of neighbors. In 1874, the landmark case of Mary Ellen Wilson exposed child abuse in New York and led to the formation of the first Child Protection Agency. Historians still argue whether that early scandal shifted public attitudes toward parental authority or simply fueled moral panic over family privacy. Now a similar ethical debate swirls through this case. When does protection become persecution under the guise of investigation? A detective stands over the mother's laptop, cataloging searches for keywords like attic safety regulations, baby monitors, and ceiling hatch repair kits. You notice lines on the screen where she searched for articles on ceiling insulation flickering like a breadcrumb trail. The father's phone shows midnight searches for locksmith services near the restaurant. These digital footprints form a timeline of growing desperation or possible forewarning. Investigators treat every search phrase as a potential clue, yet a fringe rumor among true crime podcasters insists the couple hired a secret repairman to seal the hatch permanently, only to reopen it later in panic. No official report mentions that detail, but it haunts the edges of every interview. The financial investigators converge over a spreadsheet of shared expenses. They mark entries for daycare, school uniforms, and weekend excursions that taper off in the weeks before the incident. A side column lists credit card purchases at a novelty shop selling miniature climbing gear. Detectives wonder if the child played hide and seek in the ceiling as a game before tragedy struck. A quirky tidbit passed down through staff gossip claims the child once stashed cookies up there to share with imaginary friends. You shiver picturing that innocent act twisted into something sinister by hindsight. You watch as detectives compare parental statements to scrapbooks they kept of family outings. One album shows sunny afternoons in the park, the child giggling on a swing. The next page bears a torn corner and empty spaces where photos once were. Investigators suspect they were removed to hide evidence of a weekend trip to a second property owned by the family. The parents insisted they had no other home, but whistleblower testimony hints at a hidden rental where the child was cared for while the restaurant operated. That claim remains unverified, yet it adds a layer of complexity to the case. In a corner you find a forensic psychiatrist reviewing transcripts of the parents' interviews. She studies vocal tone, eye movement, and speech patterns looking for signs of deception or trauma. Techniques derived from research in the 1970s on deception detection inform her approach, yet historians still argue whether behavioral analysis can reliably distinguish guilt from genuine fear. You catch her hesitating over a passage where the mother's voice cracks as she recites seeing her child last at dinner time. The psychiatrist flags that moment as potentially truthful, yet the defense later might argue it was coached or feigned. Through the one-way mirror you see the parents escorted to a separate room for a formal lineup of questions. They sit on metal chairs under a spotlight, hands folded on their laps. An officer asks the father to explain why his alibi places him cleaning dishes in the back hallway when surveillance video shows him at the front counter. His gaze flicks to the ceiling vent above as though searching for a silent witness. He stammers through his explanation, drawing a line between preparation of dinner plates and concern for noise overhead. You sense how every pause and inflection will be dissected by prosecutors and defense alike. Off to the side an agent catalogs physical evidence for court presentation. The red rubber ball and yellow rain boot sit under plastic covers alongside swatches of fabric and dust samples. Each item will be showcased to jurors as symbols of innocence lost. Some defense attorneys in fringe forums claim the boot was planted to frame the parents. That theory has no basis in the forensic chain of custody, yet it feeds public fascination and doubt. You recognize how such unverified claims can erode confidence in evidence that has been meticulously collected. You step into the parents' version of a break room where a single kettle boils in a corner. The mother reaches for a cup and her hands tremble. She recalls her frantic search through the kitchen at midnight, retracing steps tile by tile. The father sits on a stool nearby, head bowed, fingers tapping an invisible rhythm on his knee. They share a glance that speaks of guilt, grief, or both. A detective notes their body language, marking down whether the father's crossed arms signal resistance or shield from pain. Each clue you gathered fits like a fragment of a broken vase you can never fully restore. The ledger entries, the boot and the ball, the pencil drawing carved into the joist, all suggest choices made in desperation. Yet you cannot tell whether those choices sprang from negligence or something darker. A quirky rumor persists that on stormy nights the neon sign flickers in Morse code, spelling out the child's initials. Technical experts dismiss it as random electrical surges, yet every flicker makes you blink upward. You wonder if someone saw meaning there or if hope simply preferred to listen for a message. In that ambiguity you feel the pull between fact and longing. You remember the parent's final confession whispered through the one-way glass, "We should have checked that hatch," and you wonder if regret alone can account for every missed moment. Was that sorrow authentic or a plea for mercy? In cases where direct evidence is thin, courts often rely on inference and character. Historians still argue whether circumstantial evidence can stand without solid forensic proof, and here your conviction wavers as you recall each incomplete data point. You pause by the evidence board where photos remain tacked beside journal excerpts and witness logs. The red ball sits in its sealed pouch, a mute testament to innocence. The yellow boot refuses to tell you more. You touch the plastic cover through the glass, imagining how you might have saved the child had you peered up earlier. The weight of hindsight presses on you. You step into the alley where midnight searches once echoed. You feel the cool brick under your fingertips and recall how the mother knelt by that rain boot, hope flickering in her eyes like a candle flame. You imagine the questions she asked the night air. What did she hear? What did she feel? Those queries remain unanswered. Every witness who claimed to hear crying or laughter offers only a whisper, a half-heard echo. Behind you, the neon sign pulses in a rhythm you cannot follow. It seems to beat like a heart too faint to sustain life. You lean against the dumpster and let the familiar chill wash over you. A stray cat slinks by, pausing to peer at the ceiling vents before slipping away. You wonder if even animals sense truths we ignore. You drift back inside, guided by the hum of the extractor fan that never shut off. It carries faint traces of incense still clinging to the ductwork, reminders of rituals meant to soothe the unseen. You imagine the feng shui master circling that crawlspace, chanting words you do not understand. Did those rites calm a restless spirit or simply postpone a reckoning? You walk to the front counter and see the small shrine unchanged, a single candle stub and a handful of incense ash. You light an electric lamp overhead and study the shrine's remnants. Someone placed a tiny paper crane there after the trial began, a gesture of hope from an unknown visitor. You touch its creased wing and wonder who cares enough to leave that offering. In that gesture you glimpse a desperate kindness. You step back and let your gaze wander the empty tables where laughter once rose. You feel the absence of diners, the hollowed-out space where community should sit. You recall how neighbors wrote messages in chalk across the sidewalk, Xiaoming lives, why did no one look up, and you wonder how public grief shapes the story we tell. Can collective memory become evidence or does it blur the lines between truth and myth? You press your palm to the evidence room door, hearing muffled voices inside as investigators debate charges and courtroom strategy. You know they will present each fragment of dust, each fiber, each smudge as proof of guilt or proof of nothing at all. The trial will hinge on interpretation as much as fact. You imagine jurors peering at exhibits, trying to build a narrative from these scattered pieces. You step into the corner office and find the ledger still open, keys of a laptop still lit on the desk. The numbers in that book spoke of debt and desperation, but they did not speak of motive. You scroll through the last page, seeing dates and amounts but no clues to what happened the night the child vanished above the ceiling. Those entries end where the story truly begins. You move into the kitchen and lift a small piece of broken plaster from a tray. You let it crumble between your fingers. The dust drifts like tiny specters through the lamp beam. You imagine each speck carries a memory of weight on the tiles above. You close your eyes, picturing every footstep, every breath, every moment that led to that ultimate discovery. But the images blur in your mind. You step out onto the street and notice how the neon glow now seems distant, more a beacon of warning than welcome. You consider the many unanswered questions. Why did the child climb up there in the first place? Did the parents know the hatch was loose? Who whispered the lullaby into the vents? What secret did that pencil drawing reveal? Each question tugs at you like a thread that unravels the whole fabric. You take a deep breath of night air, tasting its damp sweetness. You remind yourself that some mysteries resist closure. In 1923, the Hall Mills case left jurors split over motive and evidence, and its verdict remains debated in legal circles. Historians still argue whether that trial taught us to trust circumstantial proof or to demand more. As you exhale, you recognize that this case will join those ranks of enduring uncertainty. You walk away from the restaurant, each step carrying you further from the evidence and closer to the unknown. The ceiling panels stay sealed, the panels never speak. The child's small form remains silent in the memory of that discovery. And in that lingering silence you feel the ache of questions with no answers, the weight of shadows we refuse to illuminate. Sweet dreams.